Hi there. I hope you're having a good day today. I watched the last video and I realized that there's always more. More to discover, more to learn, especially more to experience. We're going to talk a little bit more today about the breath. And I think we should start by considering the idea that was proposed by Herbert Clarke, Herbert L. Clarke, the famous cornetist and band leader and teacher. And most of us have played his tactical studies, his characteristic studies possibly, and many of the cornet solos that he arranged. He used to call the human body the great machine. And I think that's understandable when you look at it. In other words, there are a lot of parts. It's complicated. It's kind of like if you were to disassemble a car engine or a traditional, spring-powered watch, for example, a Swiss watch. It's very complex. There's a lot going on in it. And for most of us, we walked into a room and the floor was covered with the parts of that engine. We might not know exactly where to start in terms of putting it together. And this is a little bit how the biological machine, our body, works. Now, there is a difference. A biological machine is adaptable. It's alive. And that means if one part is not doing its job, just like in a car engine, if one part's not doing its job sufficiently, then the other parts are not able to help. In a biological machine, when one part's not doing its job sufficiently, it's totally natural. It's almost an unconscious direct reflex that the other parts will try and come in to help. And this is what causes most of our problems playing the trumpet. So that's why slow practice and careful observation of the skills, like breathing skills, is so important, and why you really need to keep coming back to it every day, as all great players do. So the fact that we have a machine in which one part can sense that another part is not quite doing its job correctly or sufficiently and tries to come in and help, that causes an imbalance in the machine. There's a phrase that's been popular for years among the New England Patriot football team. Please let that go if you're not a Patriots fan, but it applies to every team, and our body is actually like a team that is trying to work like, as we might say, a well-oiled machine. So the phrase from the Patriots is, do your job. Now that can mean a lot of things. But what it mainly means is, on this play, you have a certain function, and you need to fulfill that function. And if you don't, the whole team will suffer. If you don't do your job, then the team will suffer. And there's always a temptation on a football team, when you sense that something is moving in a certain way and you're not sure what's going to happen, you may want to go and help another player. And unless you're a very, very experienced player, that's probably not a good idea. The first thing is do your job. So what we need to do when we're training our body to play is make the job, what is the job, very clear in our own mind. What is the job of the breath? So today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the most difficult things, and I'm sure I'll come back to it many times in many of these videos because it's so elusive, this thing we call support, that I have rarely heard a good definition of it, one that's satisfying or that helps you to play better. But I'm going to suggest something to you today. If you've heard it before, then apply it. If you haven't heard it before, think about what it might mean and see if you can experience it for yourself. And it's a simple idea. We talked about in the last video how when we inhale, the diaphragm contracts, the ribs kick out, and you have this descending diaphragm, which the diaphragm is flattening out. In its normal position when it's relaxed is it's domed and it's up inside the chest cavity, resting against the lungs. So when we're moving air through the trumpet after taking a breath, the main job of support is to support the relaxation of the diaphragm. And what most players are doing is they're trying to help the relaxation of the diaphragm. They're trying to add to it, help it in some way. And actually what they need to do is do their job to allow the diaphragm to relax. Now, that's a fine theory, and you can check it out for yourself in terms of what's happening scientifically or medically speaking, but that's not important for us. What's important is, what does it feel like? Can you get the feeling of release? So I'm going to give you an idea. You're always dealing with air flow and air pressure, a combination of and it's always changing. So when you have an etude that jumps around a lot, has a lot of articulation in it, has a lot of dynamic changes, maybe rapid changes, all those things make it much more difficult to stay balanced. And as that happens, as we start to lose our balance, what happens? We start to engage muscles that don't need to be engaged if we were able to maintain alignment with gravity, right? And the same thing happens in our breathing system when we're playing. Any system, when it's struggling, another one starts to try and come in and help, and then the gears start to grind a little bit. And we all know what it feels like. Fatigue sets in quickly. We start to get less accurate. We start to lose control of the pitch and the sound. Eventually, everything breaks down. We can't make it all the way through the etude or the solo. You see, I don't think there's a trombone player alive who hasn't experienced that very uncomfortable sensation. So I'm going to give you a very simple exercise to do. And again, this is something you already know how to do. If you're not good at it, if you find that you're not good at it, just relax and use your imagination. Now, I usually tell my students a little story. It's like, you know, we agree to get together at the park, and we both ride our bicycles to the park, and we lean the bikes up against the tree, and we're having a conversation. We're enjoying seeing one another. There are no masks involved. It's great. The weather's wonderful. And out of the corner of your eye, you notice that somebody is looking at your bike, and pretty soon they get on the bike and they start to run away. And what would you do? Without thinking about it, you do something like, "Hey!" Now that was pretty loud. My wife actually is, you know, she's on the other end of the house. We have a kind of a spread out house. And she always gets nervous. It always kind of makes her shudder when I do that. It's because it's so explosive. Here's the key. When I did that, "Hey!" That's all I did. I just released the air very quickly. I threw the air. Now, I didn't force, I didn't push, there's no pushing involved. I just threw the air, and when the air passed through my vocal cords, they started vibrating, created resonance in the body. So it's a little bit like the martial arts yell, the karate yell that some of you may have practiced. It's a way of kind of centering your focus. But the point here is, what happens when that takes place is your breathing system is very relaxed. You're having a conversation, everything is cool. And then suddenly you see an emergency, and what happens? Do your stomach muscles tighten up? Think about it. Actually, what I'm going to ask you to do is try this. And what you're looking for is not, "Hey! Oh! Oh!" You're looking for resonance, loud resonance. And when it's controlled, when it's balanced, that's what great opera singing is. I sat in front of some of the world's greatest opera singers, and it's something you don't want to do. They play louder, they sing louder than most brass instruments can play. It's really quite astounding what the human voice can do. So we want to take that from our own experience and then apply it to the trumpet, because many of the same things are going on. Now, granted, the vocal cords have less resistance, they vibrate more easily than the embouchure. But we can make our job a lot easier for ourselves. So I want you to try that exercise. And you can do that explosive yell. And you can also sustain tone like we've talked about doing before. Now, there's something we didn't talk about much in previous videos. And that's because it's anatomical. But what you have going on is you have a chest cavity, a thoracic cavity, and you have an abdominal cavity. And in the thoracic cavity, in your chest, you have your heart and your lungs. And the diaphragm, the heart and the lungs are sitting on top of the diaphragm. And below the diaphragm is the abdominal cavity, and that's where your internal organs are residing. Now, below your internal organs is something called the pelvic floor. So that's in your hips. If you can picture your hip bones, that's like a shallow bowl inside the hip bones. Now, why is this important? It's because most people can't feel it. And it's a critical part of really, really good wind instrument playing, especially high pressure wind instrument playing. So what's happening? Well, when you take a breath, most people say breathe low. When you do that, you let go, you relax, and you'll feel the pressure increase against the pelvic floor. Unless you're squeezing and holding that pressure back, as the diaphragm moves down, your internal organs move down, you notice that your abdominal area grows a little bit, appears to grow, and that's putting pressure on the pelvic floor. This is a good thing because the pelvic floor is a group of muscles that kind of crisscross, and they form like a basket that supports all your internal organs. So when you create pressure in the abdominal cavity, that basket, the pelvic floor, is getting pressure on it, and guess what? It's like a trampoline. If you let go of it, it rebounds just like the diaphragm rebounds when you let go of it. If you breathe in and you let go, the diaphragm kicks the air out of your body. If you breathe in, you put pressure on the pelvic floor, it stretches, and then it returns to its normal shape. Now, beyond that, things get a little bit tricky. But if you can just try and feel what happens when the air continues to flow out. I talked about a little bit last time the resonance in the voice and working that. That's a great way to check and see whether you're supporting the air. In other words, as the air flows out of your body, is something happening in the abdominal region, inside, underneath the diaphragm, as it were, to support the diaphragm so that it's able to relax. Otherwise, it will get stuck, and you will be squeezing and pushing, but you won't get very much support for the tone or the air. So I guess the question is, how can we practice this? And I'm going to make a very strong suggestion to you. When you practice, you should be doing high intensity exercises and low intensity exercises. And of course, those in between. But high intensity are easier to feel. Low intensity are much more subtle. And we need the whole range in order to play the instrument with great control, because the intensity is constantly changing. So I have a little exercise I want to share with you, and this is about flow. We talked a little bit about flow last time, a little bit about pressure. This is about flow. So a quick story. Arturo Sandoval, who some of you may know, and whose playing I tremendously admire, and musicianship I tremendously admire. He was a guest artist for one of the 4th of July celebrations here in Boston a few years back. And I was playing with the Pops Orchestra at that time, and Arturo in the rehearsal was coming on for his number. And I was going to be going on stage at the same time. So I was waiting at the opening to the stage. He came walking down the hall, and he was doing this. He's just pumping air. And if you know Arturo, he's a big guy, right? Barrel-chested, big guy. So he was moving a lot of air. And then as he walked along, he saw a light bulb with one of those string switches on it, with a string hanging down. And from about 6 feet away, he goes, and the string actually jumped. He was able to target that string and hit it direct on. Now that should tell you something. Now, of course, you got to consider the style of music that Arturo normally plays. He has tremendous power of flow and of focus. And that's what we're working for here. So I saw what he was doing, and I started to do a few of my own little unusual exercises, and he thought I was making fun of him. So he walked over, and he made the OK symbol, and he put it in front of my face. He says, "Blow through the hole." So if I did that to you, it's very possible you wouldn't know what to do, and that's exactly the way I felt. So when he put that in front of my face, I just let go of any idea of trying and just let my body try and figure out how to do that all by itself. So I blew through the hole. Now I'm forming an airstream. So Arturo says to me, do it again. And then he started moving the hole around. Now by this time, the trombone section, who was sitting on stage and could see us backstage, started looking around like, what's going on there? And so it was causing a little bit of a scene. And about that time, Arturo says, that was very good, which I much greatly appreciated because I had no idea whether I was being successful or not. He says, usually guys, when they blow, the air spreads out or it gets all shaky. So what that tells you is that there's, oh! That's easy flow, but without focus. Your vocal cords work automatically. Here, and if you can see, I have a piece of paper that's about 7 feet away from me, and that paper is blowing in the wind like this. Now I'm going to pick up another piece of paper here. And this is a great exercise. I only have a few minutes today, so and I don't want to go too long, but there's a lot going on here. So this is just the beginning. Now I've done this before on another video. Watch. Now I'm holding the paper like a sail. Now if it were a triangle, that would even be better, right? Because a triangle would be like the mast, and then the edge of the sail, and then the boom. And that's the way it would work on a simple sailboat, just a triangular sail. So what happens? This paper is catching the air. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the future. My cheeks are catching the air. Now this area is catching the air. Why? So it can focus the air and make a stream. Now how can you tell whether this is happening? Well, if you take the paper and you hold it up against a wall, see how I'm blowing that paper forcefully against the wall? You see what happens? Unless I keep that air moving and focused, unless there's enough flow and enough focus, I can't hold the paper on the wall. Now, if you're doing it on a brick wall, there's a lot of texture. If you're closer to the paper, that's going to make it easier. So you have total control to adjust the flow, or rather to adjust your distance, so that if you're not strong enough, you can't produce enough flow or enough focus to do it, you keep on getting closer and closer to the paper. So give yourself a break if it's not easy to start out, and sometimes it's not. We tend to hold a lot of tension in our breathing system. So I hope this idea will help you. And there's another thing that we need to mention. I'll probably extend this a little bit when I go on to the next video. This is what I call putting on the brakes. We have many ways that we can put the brakes on the air. And why is that a bad thing? Well, it's a way of controlling the air. And the problem is you want to keep it as simple as possible. So just like with your voice, where you have a direct relationship between the flow of the air, your vocal cords, and the shapes inside your mouth, it's the same thing on the trumpet. So you don't want to put on the brakes with your lips. You want to be able to produce squeezing power, but you don't want to choke off the airstream when you do it. You don't want to put on the brakes by pushing the trumpet into your face. And it does work. This is why people use a lot of pressure to close that opening in the lips. And what does that do? It chokes off the airflow. Pretty soon you don't have any airflow. When the airflow is choked off, what do? You have to blow harder. When you blow harder, you're creating more pressure and more tension. This is a huge problem. So I'm going to get into that in the next video, because there are many ways that you can put on the brakes. But what we need to realize now, when we're in the initial stages, is it's all about the good feeling of flow. And when you have that feeling, there are a lot of things that we can play that are easier. Let's see. There's a tune that I really love that John Williams wrote. I'm not even sure I'm playing it in the right key. I'm just hearing it in my mind right now. This is the theme from JFK, the movie, and I think you'll enjoy it. Now I want to explain something. When I went up into squeaky range, what I was doing is checking to see whether I was choking the air off, whether I was putting the brakes on. And if I play wide open, then it's easy to make that range change. Now, I realized I was playing it a step up from where it's written in the original key. So it would be starting on an F, I think, on the B flat trumpet. You can keep on going up if you stay open. Now, granted, I'm not a lead player and I'm pinching those things a little bit, but this is something you want to aspire to. Can you stay open? If you can stay open and the air can get through, the lips can keep vibrating. Now, granted, this is something that many people aspire to, and it's not easy. And I'm not playing on what someone would call a cheater mouthpiece. It's pretty deep, and that's neither here nor there. You can play, a person who has these skills can play on any mouthpiece. Some will make the job easier. Some will make their career last longer, but it's not going to make it more possible for them to play the notes. So there are a lot of things that are going on here. I'm going to try and address each one, but just keep in mind for now, you got to figure out how the machine works. You have to experience this for yourself, how the inhaling and the exhaling are coordinated. You need to not let these parts interfere, hold back the air by choking it off with the tongue, with the throat, with isometric tension inside your body. You need to stay open and relaxed just as if you were singing. And you need to form an air stream. Now, we haven't done anything subtle yet. And maybe we'll work on that a little bit next time, and maybe some exercises as well. But I hope some of these things will give you a kind of a jumping off point to experiment with. And that's how you're going to learn how to play the trumpet. You're going to learn by discovering it for yourself. So go and get some work done and enjoy the process. And I will see you later on. Bye-bye.